After my dad's funeral, I came home to find my clothes, books, and photo frames scattered across the driveway. My stepmother stood at the door, holding a glass of wine, and said coldly, "Your father's gone, and so is your place here." I didn't say a word. My heart felt heavy, but my mind was clear. If this was what they wanted, I would walk away with my head high. I packed what I could into the back of my old car. It was raining hard, and every drop that hit my face mixed with tears I didn't want anyone to see. Inside the house, I could hear laughter. My stepbrothers were joking about how the extra room was finally free. I didn't look back. I just drove away, the same way my father taught me to when something isn't worth fighting for. Quietly but with purpose. For the first few nights, I parked behind an old diner where I used to work part-time. The manager, a kind older woman named Maggie, noticed me sleeping in the car and offered me a few late-night shifts. I took everyone I could get. I didn't tell her what happened. I just said I needed extra hours. Every morning, I would wash up in the diner bathroom, fix my uniform, and get back to work. Those months were the hardest of my life. There were nights I went to bed hungry. Nights I cried myself to sleep remembering Dad's voice telling me he'd always protect me. I wondered if he'd known Cheryl would do this to me. But even in those thoughts, I found strength. My dad raised me to be independent. He used to say, "Alyssa, life's unfair, but if you stay kind and work hard, you'll outlast them all." I started saving every dollar I made. I stopped spending on anything I didn't need. No coffee, no new clothes, no small treats. I lived off tips and diner meals, keeping my dream alive of one day having my own place again. Slowly, things began to change. Maggie helped me get a better position in the kitchen. She said I had a good work ethic and a quiet determination she admired. Each night after closing, when the diner was empty, I'd sit by the window and look at the moon, whispering, "I'm going to make it, Dad." It became my small ritual, a promise I made to myself and to him. I wasn't angry anymore. I didn't wish Cheryl or her sons any harm. I just wanted peace, the kind my dad always wanted for me. Every small step forward felt like a victory. I learned how to live on my own, to depend on no one, to rebuild without bitterness. I knew one day I would return stronger, not for revenge, but to prove that no one could throw me away as easily as they thought. Because they might have taken my name is Alyssa Reed, and losing my dad broke something inside me that I can't describe. He wasn't just my father, he was my best friend, my protector, and the only person who ever made me feel safe in that house. When my mom left us years ago, Dad was the one who stayed. He worked double shifts, packed my lunches, and helped me with homework even when he was exhausted. He always told me, "It's just you and me, kid. We'll get through anything." When he met Cheryl, I tried to be happy for him. She seemed nice at first, polite smiles, sweet words, but there was something cold behind her kindness. She had 2 sons, Derek and Kyle, both older than me, both used to getting what they wanted. From the beginning, they made me feel like I was the outsider. They'd mock me at the dinner table, laugh when Dad wasn't looking, and Cheryl never stopped them. She'd just sit there, pretending she didn't notice. Still, Dad tried to keep peace. He'd say, "Give it time, Alyssa. Families take work." And I did try. I helped with chores, stayed quiet, stayed out of their way. But no matter what I did, I was never enough for them. I could feel the tension growing worse after every argument, every ignored word, every quiet dinner where Dad and I sat on one side of the table, and they sat on the other. When Dad got sick, everything shifted. Cheryl suddenly became the devoted wife, always by his side, making sure no one could visit him without her permission. I didn't understand why she kept me away. I'd ask to see him, and she'd say, "He needs rest, Alyssa. Don't stress him." I'd stand by his door, hearing her whisper things I couldn't make out. Deep down, I knew something wasn't right, but I didn't want to believe it. The day Dad passed away felt like the world stopped moving. The hospital room was quiet, and his hand went cold in mine before I could even say goodbye properly. I remember Cheryl pulling me away and saying, "He's gone, Alyssa. You need to be strong." But her tone wasn't comforting. It was final, almost like she was closing a door. The funeral was small, filled with people who spoke kind words, but all I could hear was silence. When they lowered the casket, I felt like part of me went with it. Cheryl stood beside me, dry-eyed, while Derek and Kyle whispered to each other, already talking about what came next. That's when I realized they weren't mourning him, they were moving on. That night, I sat in Dad's old study, surrounded by his books and his scent that still lingered in the air. I stared at the empty chair where he used to sit and tell me stories about when I was little. It hit me that the only person who ever truly saw me was gone. And in that silence, I understood something I didn't want to face. Without him, I wasn't part of this family anymore. Home, but they could never take my will to rise again. The night after the burial, I drove back to the house with heavy eyes and a numb heart. I had stayed with my aunt for a few days after the funeral just to clear my head, but I wanted to go home. To my room, to Dad's old chair, to the place that still smelled like him. When I turned into the driveway, my headlights caught something strange. My clothes, boxes, and even my framed photos were piled near the trash bins, half soaked from the evening rain. For a second, I just stared, thinking maybe it was a mistake. But then the front door opened. Cheryl stood there, holding a wine glass, wearing that same fake calm smile she always had. "You're back," she said, taking a slow sip. "Didn't expect you this soon." I stepped closer, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. "Why are my things outside?" I asked. She leaned against the doorframe and said casually, "Your dad left the house to me. You're not on the deed anymore." Her words hit me harder than any slap. My knees almost gave out. Dad had promised me this home would always be mine. We'd even talked about it before his surgery. How this place was my future, how it would always be my safe space. I looked at her, trying to find some trace of kindness, but there was none. Her eyes were cold, empty. Behind her, Derek and Kyle stood in the hallway, watching like it was entertainment. "You can't be serious," I whispered. Cheryl shrugged. "You've had a free ride long enough, Alyssa. You're not a child anymore. It's time to move on." I wanted to argue, to scream that she was lying, that Dad would never have done this. But the look on her face told me it wouldn't matter. She had already made up her mind. I realized then that this wasn't about paperwork or ownership. It was about getting rid of me completely. I bent down and started picking up my things. The rain had soaked through the boxes, and some of my old photo albums were ruined. My hands were shaking as I tried to save whatever I could. No one came to help. Derek just laughed quietly and said, "Guess you should have been nicer to Mom." I didn't reply. There was no point. Words meant nothing in that house anymore. I packed what I could into my car, clothes, Dad's old wristwatch, and one picture of us from my graduation. Cheryl stood there the whole time, watching me like I was a stranger trespassing on her porch. When I finally got into my car, she said, "Don't come back, Alyssa. It's better this way." I started the engine without looking at her. As I drove away, I felt my heart breaking all over again, not just because I'd lost my dad, but because I realized. I stood there in the rain, staring at the house that used to feel like home. Every memory I had with Dad lived inside those walls, but now it felt like a place I no longer belonged. My hands were trembling, and my throat burned from holding back tears. I wanted to yell at them, to ask how they could be so heartless right after burying the man who brought us all together. But the words never came out. I realized shouting wouldn't change anything. They'd already decided who I was to them. No one. So I stayed quiet. I bent down, picked up the last box, and put it in my car. The sound of the rain hitting the hood was the only thing filling the silence. Cheryl was still standing at the doorway, watching me. Derek and Kyle had already gone back inside, laughing like nothing had happened. I could see the warm light from the living room glowing through the curtains, and I wondered how people could be so cruel and still sleep peacefully. I took one last look at the house, the porch Dad built by hand, the garden he planted for me when I was little. Every corner had a memory, and leaving it behind felt like losing him all over again. But I knew staying would only break me more. So, I opened the car door and sat there for a long moment, listening to the rain fall harder. My clothes were soaked, my hair stuck to my face, but I didn't care. All I could think about was how Dad used to say, "Don't waste your energy proving your worth to people who refuse to see it." I started the car and drove off without a word. No screaming, no slamming doors, just silence. That silence wasn't weakness. It was control. It was my way of saying, "You won't see me fall apart." The road ahead was blurry through the rain, but it still felt like freedom. I didn't know where I was going. I just drove until the streetlights disappeared behind me. Every mile between me and that house felt lighter. I passed the old diner where Dad used to take me for pancakes on Sundays. I remembered how he'd laugh and tell me that peace is something you build, not something people hand to you. His words echoed in my head, keeping me calm as I drove through the storm. When I finally stopped at a quiet gas station outside town, I sat in the car with my head against the steering wheel. The world was still, and for the first time in days I could breathe. I whispered to myself, you did the right thing. I didn't need to fight them to win. I'd let time do that for me. Because sometimes the strongest thing you can do isn't yelling back. It's walking away in silence, knowing that one day, that same silence will be the sound of their regret. I'd lost my home too, the last piece of him I had left. Those first few months on my own were the hardest of my life. I slept in my old car parked behind a small diner on the edge of town. It wasn't comfortable, but it was the only place where I felt safe. The nights were cold, and sometimes I woke up shivering, staring at the dark ceiling of my car and wondering if this was really how things were going to be from now on. But every time I thought about giving up, I remembered what Dad used to tell me. Don't let them decide who you become. Those words became my anchor. The diner opened early and closed late, so I asked the manager, Maggie, if I could take any extra shifts. She didn't ask many questions, just looked at me for a long moment and said, "You've got that look in your eyes, kid. The kind of look people get when they've been through something but refuse to quit." From then on, she let me work as much as I wanted. I waited tables all day, washed dishes at night, and when everyone else went home, I stayed to clean up. I kept every dollar I earned. I didn't waste anything. I'd eat simple meals from the diner kitchen and save my tips in a small envelope hidden under the driver's seat. Some days, it was only a few crumpled bills and coins, but it felt like progress. Slowly, I began to feel proud again, not for what I had, but for what I was building with my own hands. When the diner Wi-Fi stayed on after hours, I'd sit in the parking lot with my phone, taking online business classes. I barely understood half of it at first, numbers, marketing, accounting, but I kept going. I wanted more for myself, something beyond just surviving. My classmates didn't know I was sitting in a parked car while listening to lectures, but I didn't need them to. I wasn't doing it for approval. I was doing it for Dad and for me. Sometimes I'd look at the families eating together in the diner and feel a sharp pain in my chest. I missed having someone to come home to, someone to talk to about my day. But I learned how to find comfort in small things. A cup of hot coffee before sunrise, the sound of rain on the car roof, or Maggie's quiet smile when she'd say, "You're doing good, Alyssa." Little by little, I began to believe it. I wasn't just surviving anymore. I was starting over. Each tip, each late-night study session, each morning I woke up and pushed through the exhaustion. It was proof that they hadn't broken me. I didn't know what the future held yet, but for the first time since Dad died, I wasn't scared of it. It was a quiet Sunday afternoon when everything changed. I was finishing my shift at the diner when my phone buzzed. It was my aunt, the only family member who had stood by me since Dad's death. Her voice sounded different, urgent, almost trembling. She said, "Alyssa, I found something in your father's old desk. You need to come over right now." My heart skipped. I didn't know what to expect, but the way she said it made my chest tighten. When I got there, she was sitting at the dining table with a yellowed envelope in front of her. It was sealed and had my father's handwriting on it. I recognized his neat, slanted letters instantly. My aunt took a deep breath and said, "It was hidden under the drawer." I almost missed it. My hands shook as I picked it up. The paper was slightly worn, but the seal was still intact. I opened it slowly, afraid to breathe, and unfolded the pages inside. It was my father's original will, signed, dated, and notarized. My eyes scanned every line carefully, my pulse pounding in my ears. When I reached the part that said, "Half of my house and personal savings will go to my daughter, Alyssa Reed," I froze. I read it again and again, barely believing what I was seeing. Dad hadn't left me with nothing. He had kept his promise. He wanted me to have what was rightfully mine. I sat back in silence as tears filled my eyes. My aunt squeezed my hand and said softly, "I knew something wasn't right. Cheryl must have hidden this when he passed." It made sense. Cheryl had always been quick to handle the paperwork after the funeral. She told everyone Dad had made changes before he died, but I'd never seen any documents. Now I understood why. She had probably destroyed the newer version and pretended the property was all hers. For a long time, I just sat there staring at Dad's signature. It felt like he was still looking out for me, even after all this time. My aunt said we needed to get it verified immediately, so she called a lawyer she trusted. He confirmed that the will was authentic and properly filed years before my father got sick. The only problem was proving Cheryl had hidden or altered the updated version. But the truth was now in writing, and that was all I needed. That night, I drove back to the diner parking lot where I still slept, but everything felt different. I wasn't broken anymore. I wasn't powerless. I had proof. Something real that could finally expose the lies they'd built their comfort on. I held the copy of the will close to my chest and whispered, "You kept your word, Dad." For the first time in months, I slept peacefully. The house they threw me out of wasn't just a painful memory anymore. It was my father's gift, and soon it would be mine again. Building something from nothing, and even though it was slow, it was mine. The morning of the confrontation, I woke up before sunrise. My stomach was tight with nerves, but my mind was calm. After everything I'd been through, this moment felt like the beginning of justice. My aunt picked me up, and we drove together to the house that once felt like home. The same one Cheryl had thrown me out of months ago. This time, though, I wasn't coming empty-handed. My lawyer sat in the back seat with the briefcase that held my father's original will. When we pulled up, Cheryl was outside tending to the flowers near the porch. She looked up, surprised to see me, and even more shocked when she noticed the lawyer stepping out behind me. For a second, she tried to keep her composure, her usual smirk forming on her face. Well, if it isn't Alyssa," she said, brushing off her hands. "What brings you here?" I didn't answer. My lawyer did. "Mrs. Reed, we're here to discuss a matter regarding Mr. Reed's estate. I believe you'll want to hear this." Her smirk faltered just slightly, but she still tried to act confident. Derek came out of the house then, his tone smug as always. "There's nothing to discuss. Dad left everything to Mom. You're wasting your time." The lawyer opened the briefcase and placed a folder on the patio table. "Actually," he said evenly, "we have the original, notarized will signed by your father. According to this document, half of the house and savings belong to Alyssa." Cheryl froze. I watched her face closely. The fake calm she always wore cracked instantly. She stammered, "That's not possible. He updated it before he died." Derek jumped in quickly, saying, "Yeah, Dad changed it. We have proof." My lawyer stayed composed and replied, "We've seen your version. The signature doesn't match. We had a handwriting expert verify both copies. The one you submitted to probate court was forged." Silence filled the air. Cheryl's face went pale. Derek looked away, his jaw tightening. For the first time, they didn't have anything to say. My aunt stood beside me, her hand on my shoulder, steady and strong. All those months of pain, silence, and loss suddenly felt worth it. Cheryl tried to recover, her voice shaking. "You don't understand," he told me. But my lawyer interrupted firmly. "Mrs. Reed, I suggest you stop talking. The matter will now proceed to court." The hearing didn't take long. The evidence was clear. The judge reviewed both documents, listened to the expert testimony, and ruled in my favor. Cheryl had to vacate the property within 30 days and return the money she had withdrawn from Dad's accounts. When I walked out of the courtroom, I didn't feel the need to celebrate or gloat. I just felt light, like the weight I'd been carrying since the funeral had finally lifted. I didn't need to say a single word to Cheryl. The truth had. When the judge read out the final decision, I felt like time stood still. After months of waiting, the truth had finally come to light. The court ruled that half of the house and my father's savings rightfully belonged to me. Cheryl sat in silence, her hands gripping the edge of the table, her face drained of color. Derek and Kyle, who had always looked so confident and arrogant, now looked completely lost. They didn't say a word. It was like they were finally realizing who their mother really was, and how far she had gone out of greed. The judge ordered Cheryl to leave the house within 30 days and return the money she had taken from my father's accounts. Her lawyer tried to argue, but it didn't matter anymore. The proof was clear. When the session ended, everyone began to leave, but Cheryl stayed seated, staring down at the papers in front of her. I stood quietly by the door, just watching. A few months ago, she'd thrown me out of that same house with a smirk on her face. Now, she was the one being told to leave. I didn't feel anger or joy. I just felt calm. The kind of calm that comes when justice finally catches up to those who think they can get away with anything. My aunt squeezed my hand as we walked out of the courthouse, whispering, "He'd be proud of you, Alyssa." I smiled softly. I knew she was right. Dad always said the truth has a way of finding its way home. And that day, it finally did. The following weeks were strange. Cheryl tried to avoid facing me directly. She sent her lawyer to handle the transfer papers and the repayment process. Derek and Kyle barely looked at her. I heard they had both moved out soon after, too ashamed and angry to stay with her. For once, the house that caused me so much pain wasn't filled with their laughter or their cruel words. It was quiet again. The day she moved out, I parked across the street and watched from my car. She looked smaller than I remembered, like the weight of her lies had finally settled on her shoulders. The moving truck pulled away slowly, and she stood for a moment on the porch, glancing around as if trying to hold onto what she had stolen. But there was nothing left for her there. Not love, not comfort, not family, only the emptiness she had created. I didn't step out of the car or say a single word. I didn't need to. My silence spoke for me, just like it had that night she threw me out. Only this time, it wasn't out of pain, it was peace. I finally had what was mine, and I didn't have to fight anymore. As the sun set behind the house, I whispered softly, "We did it, Dad." It wasn't victory I felt, it was closure. I had kept my promise, not through anger or revenge, but through patience, truth, and quiet strength. Spoken for me, and it was louder than anything I could have ever said. The day I got the keys back, I stood on the porch for a long time before opening the door. The house was quiet, almost lifeless, but it still carried pieces of my father everywhere. The smell of old wood, the faded marks on the doorframe where he used to measure my height, the soft creak of the stairs. For a moment, I just stood there, letting the memories wash over me. It didn't feel like revenge anymore. It felt like coming home. The first few days were hard. The house was in bad shape, cold and empty, but I didn't mind. I rolled up my sleeves and got to work. I started with Dad's study, wiping off the dust, putting his books back in order, and opening the windows to let in the light. I wanted the house to breathe again. Every wall I painted, every floor I polished felt like healing an old scar. I didn't want to erase the past. I wanted to make peace with it. Sometimes I'd play Dad's favorite music while I worked. It made me feel like he was still around, watching over me. There were moments when I'd stop and smile, remembering the way he used to hum those same tunes while fixing things around the house. That's when I realized I wasn't just rebuilding the house, I was rebuilding myself. Once the renovation was done, I decided to turn the kitchen into something meaningful. That kitchen had always been the heart of our home. It's where Dad taught me to cook when I was a kid. He said cooking was more than food. It was love and patience combined. With that memory in mind, I started a small catering business. I didn't have much money, but I had recipes, passion, and determination. At first, I only cooked for small events, birthday parties, office lunches, neighborhood gatherings. People loved the food, and word began to spread. The business slowly grew, one order at a time. There were days I worked until midnight, tired but grateful. I could almost hear Dad saying, "See, kid? I told you you'd make it." His photo now sits on the kitchen counter, the same spot where he used to sit and taste whatever I was cooking. Every morning before I start work, I look at that photo and say, "Good morning, Dad." It's a small ritual that keeps me grounded. The house feels alive again, warm, full of laughter and the smell of home-cooked meals. Sometimes I catch myself standing by the window, watching the sunrise, just like he used to. The pain is still there, but it's softer now, replaced by peace. I finally turned the place they tried to take from me into something beautiful. Not for revenge, but as a tribute to the man who believed in me. This house isn't just bricks and walls anymore. It's proof that love, no matter how broken, can always find its way back home. It was a quiet Sunday morning when I heard a knock at the door. I wasn't expecting anyone, so I wiped my hands on a towel and walked over. When I opened the door, I froze for a second. Cheryl stood there. The woman who once threw me out of my own home now looked smaller somehow. Her shoulders slumped, her hair streaked with gray, her eyes tired. For a moment, neither of us spoke. The past hung between us like heavy air. "I never thought you'd fight back," she finally said, her voice shaky. There was no wine glass in her hand this time, no smug smile. Just a tired woman who had lost everything. I looked at her, not with anger, not with pity, just calm. I simply said, "Dad raised me to." Then, without another word, I closed the door, softly, not out of hate, but to end a chapter that never deserved to stay open. I stood there for a while after the door clicked shut. I could still hear the rain outside, just like the night I left this house months ago. But this time, I wasn't leaving. I was home. The silence felt different now, peaceful, not painful. It was the sound of closure. Over the next few days, I found myself thinking about Cheryl. I wasn't angry anymore. In a strange way, I even felt sorry for her. Greed had cost her everything. The house, her reputation, and the trust of her own sons. Derek and Kyle had moved away after the court case, barely speaking to her. The woman who once had everything now had no one. But that wasn't my burden to carry. I had already carried enough pain to last a lifetime. Every morning, I still followed the same routine. I made coffee, opened the curtains, and let the sunlight fill the room. The house no longer felt like a reminder of what I'd lost. It felt like a reminder of how far I'd come. Sometimes I'd sit by the window and whisper a quiet thank you to Dad. He had given me strength long before I ever needed it. The catering business continued to grow. People loved the food, but more than that, they loved the story behind it. How a daughter rebuilt her father's house and turned pain into purpose. I didn't tell them every detail, but I shared enough to let them know that sometimes strength doesn't come from fighting loudly. It comes from standing your ground quietly. One evening, as the sun set behind the trees, I walked outside and looked at the house. The windows glowed warmly from the inside, and the air smelled like fresh bread from the kitchen. I smiled. Cheryl's visit didn't reopen old wounds. It reminded me that healing doesn't need an audience. Because in the end, the sweetest revenge isn't shouting or proving someone wrong. It's living a peaceful life in the home they tried to take from you. Stronger, calmer, and free. And that's exactly what I had done.